What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back. Today we are going to be taking a deep dive, maybe slightly geeky dive, into the flight control systems of the Mirage F1 and also its force feedback implementation, because I have to say I have just downloaded this module simply to do a little demo, and I just rented it and realized that it's probably one of the best modules to fly in DCS with force feedback. So today I just wanted to do a little test flight demonstrating the flight characteristics of the Mirage F1 and specifically how it feels like to fly with force feedback. So if you're interested and if you are planning on getting into the force feedback world at some stage, I think you might find this video sort of insightful and useful, but I do warn you it's going to be a little bit more technical. So if you were expecting to see some sort of dogfights or explosions, maybe skip this one. But if you are interested in some geeky pilot flying stuff, then I think this is going to be a good one.
We have 2 good engine starts. You're clear to disconnect the headset. We'll see you on the left with the pin. Thanks a lot.
Alright, so let's dive right into the flight control system of the Mirage F1. It's a hydromechanical, non-fly-by-wire system. It's very conventional. It's using System 1 and System 2, which is very common in a lot of jets, including airliners, for some redundancy for the flight controls in aileron, elevator, and rudder. We have leading edge slats here in 2 sections, trailing edge flaps also in 2 sections, a very conventional tail with an elevator and a rudder. Now, within the Mirage F1, there is an inbuilt flight control system to change the feel, both the resistance and the sensitivity of the stick in pitch. And it is implemented here in the Arges F1, which is absolutely awesome. Basically, it's this thing called Arthur. Now, in reality, I think it actually combines, this switch actually combines 2 different systems, Arthur and Dashpot, which is basically, technically speaking, it's a variable sensitivity crank bell. It's driven off System 1. In auto mode, adjust the control stick sensitivity as a function of altitude and speed, as well as the stick resistance with speed. So basically what it means is resistance is the amount of pressure the pilot needs to put onto the stick, right? And in here, you know, the stick is quite loaded. Like, it's very difficult for you guys to obviously you know, see that, because I am using a force feedback stick. You would have to feel it, but basically it changes from 2 kilograms up to 20 kilograms of pressure that the pilot needs to apply. And you can actually test it here. If we go out of auto mode, we can put it into low gain or high gain, and if we pull back a little bit, you'll see it's difficult for you guys to tell, but there is a pressure change on the stick for me. And basically it's showing the difference. So at the moment we're 60% loaded up to the maximum on the ground, and it's awesome because, you know, that's actually simulated. As far as I can tell, it seems to work pretty well with the Arges F1. So as the speed increases, the amount of pressure you have to apply increases as well. And basically that's to create a more stable airplane, and to prevent the pilot from over controlling it at high speed so that it's not as sensitive. But also, it actually changes the amount of stick deflection that's required for a certain amount of elevator movement. So at high speed with flaps up, you might need up to 35 millimeters for 1 degree of elevator deflection. So basically 35 millimeters. I don't know exactly how to measure that, but let's call it that much. Whereas at low speed with flaps extended, you might only need 5 millimeters, so a lot less, to get the exact same out of the elevator. So it basically is a variable sensitivity and a variable feel system, and that's really implemented super well in with force feedback. And obviously the other amazing thing is, and I love hearing, if you actually listen carefully, you hear like these servos going, it's quite subtle, but it's quite cool. And obviously, you know, my stick displaces exactly where you would expect the real aircraft stick to deflect, as well as you can see in the virtual cockpit when you're trimming. And that gives us an incredible feel, because let's say if I've trimmed this much back, right, I've trimmed quite a lot back, say I'm flying at high alpha and I haven't trimmed this much back. Obviously with a conventional stick, a, you know, spring-loaded stick that most people would use, you wouldn't have any idea how much travel is actually left to go back. But you see, Not very much in my particular case here. So that's why force feedback is amazing in this airplane in particular, we'll just trim it back to takeoff position. Also, we have dampeners here. We have dampers for the elevator and for the yaw to prevent Dutch roll and also help with some coordinated turns. I didn't mention it, but we do also have some spoilers on the wings to help with conventional sort of maneuvering of the airplane and have coordinated flight. And we have these dampers that we can switch off, which we'll test out in flight, and I'm just going to demonstrate exactly what the effect of that is. And it's a very analog, very kind of mechanical airplane. We also have a combat flap switch, which we'll test out in the air, which extends the flaps below 300 knots, especially useful to increase your rate of turn for dogfighting. And we actually have a switch here, hypers, which we can basically override any kind of leading edge slats or flap selections. And in some certain cases that is very useful, especially if you want to extend your glide of an engine failure, for example. You do not want these leading edge slats to extend like they often do below when the AOA is above 8 degrees at a certain speed, or below 440 knots, I think. So it is there's a lot to take in if you're used to flying something that F-16 or F-18, everything just happens automatically. This is an airplane that requires maybe a little bit more thought when you actually fly it. So having said that, let's taxi out to the runway and actually let's go and fly it. Alright, taxi lights coming on. Say goodbye to the ground crew there. And we'll taxi out here from the Draken ramp at Groom Lake, where they're doing some very secret testing of various different aircraft and systems. As we're taxiing out to the runway here, I just want to give you a quick overview of how things currently stand with force feedback in DCS. So we have had some new joysticks pop up with force feedback, which is great, but unfortunately the amount of people currently using force feedback is still relatively small. What that means is that developers for various modules in aircraft don't seem to implement the amount of force feedback that they potentially could, because there's a high chance that they actually do have access to the data, to the systems of the airplanes, to the amount of forces that need to be exerted in a certain condition for a certain weight for a certain etc. But unfortunately we are currently in a position where not all of that is translated, and some modules are better than others. The F1 is certainly one of them, like I've just explained with the Arthur system, but we do have a way around that, and currently it is by implementing our own effects on top of what is currently available from the developers. And FFBeast, the joystick base that I am using, which I can vouch for. Now, I'm not getting paid by FFBeast whatsoever to do this. I'm just incredibly excited about the technology, what it brings and how it feels. However, the main advantage of FFBeast, I think, apart from the fact that it can probably generate a lot more force compared to a lot of other force feedback sticks that I've seen pop up on the market, is the fact that it has a lot of effects that we can apply on top of what is given to us by the developers. For example, in the F-18, as the pilot approaches high AOA, the stick forces increase, but that isn't given to us by Eagle Dynamics in DCS. Therefore, we can apply this extra effect on top in FFBeast and simulate this ourselves. Now, the downside, obviously, is that you kind of need to know or understand how the real airplane works. So the downside is that it is a little bit of a dark art and a science behind tuning these airplanes, and that is simply because the developers are just not providing all the force feedback information that they potentially could, and that is as a result of not that many people using force feedback, which is why I am really excited about trying to promote it in a way that more and more people get into it. A, because it's just unbelievably fun and transforms the whole flying experience, but B, because we are going to get better force feedback support from the developers the more people get into it. Having said that, I do totally understand that the barrier to entry with the pricing is pretty high for force feedback sticks, so I am hoping that at some point they become much more accessible and that more and more people can get into it. Okay, landing lights coming on. Clear both ways. And we'll get this puppy ready for a low transition takeoff. And the benefit of having a sort of an airplane that's got a very, shall we say, stiff giggity, or a very loaded flight control stick is that, especially at speed, is that it allows you to have very minute corrections, because, you know, there's you've got just that really nice pressure on the stick for you to just move it a tiny bit without over controlling it, and that results in very smooth, especially for this airplane in particular, because it seems to fly extremely smoothly. It's sensitive but not twitchy, if that makes sense, so it's very, very easy to predict what a small movement will result in basically what the airplane does. Okay, so flaps are down. We'll take the nose wheel steering out of high gain and run the brakes. Slowly throttle up because this engine requires some care handling. It's definitely one that you can easily compressor stall and do all sorts of weird things. You can't really close the throttle too quickly. Basically makes it kind of very fun and interesting to fly, so speeds get approaching 150. Quite high elevation here. Gear and flaps are coming up. And we'll just maintain the slow transition. I'll just show you how, you know, doing a low pass in this airplane is just kind of a pleasure. I'll just trim forward a little bit. And we'll just maintain it, sort of accelerating, constantly trimming down over the runway. As we get into land, we'll do a much lower pass. This is just kind of like a regular low transition takeoff. Gently pull up, and the amount of pressure on the stick now is increasing because, you know, the speed is increased, and this thing climbs like an absolute rocket ship. Also doesn't seem to run out of fuel anywhere near as quickly as some of the other jets. You know, you can be in full burner in this thing for a while. Now, the interesting thing about rolling this airplane, it's a very interesting sensation I find compared to a lot of other airplanes in DCS, and that's specific to somebody who's using a force feedback stick, because the amount of pressure required to exert on the stick for a particular output is relatively high in this airplane, or at least my understanding is it should be this way, and that's the way I've tuned it as well. But the interesting thing is that the airplane is extremely responsive. So if we, for example, if we want to do a roll of some sort, we'll take it out of burner here. If we want to do a roll of some sort, it's extremely quick to roll, but it actually feels a little bit like a pressure stick in the sense that there's a lot of pressure that needs to be applied to the stick, right? Like, for example, but the airplane rolls pretty quickly and easily. Obviously, the faster you are, you know, the kind of slower it rolls, but if we want to do like bang out a 4-point roll, you know, it's not a very accurate one that I've done now, but it's so quick and easy, but because there's a fair amount of pressure on the stick, it kind of feels like it's a little bit of a pressure stick. It obviously isn't. It rolls exceptionally quickly and it's extremely responsive, but the amount of pressure, that initial pressure that you need, is maybe a little bit higher than some of the other airplanes, you know, with fairly light control stick inputs, such as the MiG-29, for example. Now, it's kind of a very interesting sensation because it creates this feeling of an incredibly responsive but very, very stable airplane in all axes. As we just do as we increase the G now, you'll see the stick in my hand is beginning to vibrate, and I can really tell look just how much feedback I have. I know exactly where I am and the amount of force that's required, and the amount of deflection, stick deflection required to actually maneuver an airplane like this. Relative to some other jets, you know, considering how much displacement or how many, you know, the rate of turn that we're getting is relatively low compared to the amount of stick deflection. So this thing requires a lot of control input for little output, if that makes sense. Except when it comes to roll, it rolls insanely quickly, and banging out like 8-point rolls is just awesome. It's so easy and so precise, I feel. Yeah, it's just an absolute... Yeah, it's such a pleasure to fly. This is probably my, you know, the reason I really love this airplane, I fell in love with it, is just how analog it feels. But also now, if we go, for example, into combat flaps, what we'll do is we'll press the combat flap button, and as we'll try and bleed the speed off. We need to be very careful in this airplane because you don't want to compressor stall it as well. We'll just bleed the energy with a little bit of a loaded roll, help the rudder, help it with the rudder. So, you know, it requires like proper good piloting skills, I think, to extract a lot out of this airplane. And now we can see an indicator that our half flap is out, as well as our leading edge slats, and that helps the airplane maneuver. And I can really feel everything that's happening right now. There's a lot of stick pressure that I need to, you know, exert right now just to keep the airplane like this. So if I was dogfighting for a while, I think some of my arm muscles definitely would get a little bit tired. So now I think what we'll do is we'll just go and demonstrate. We'll get rid of the combat flaps, and we'll get rid of the dampers as well. So get rid of that. And what we'll also do is we'll actually override the flap system so that we have no slats or flaps whatsoever. So now this is kind of like a pure, shall we say, pilot in control of absolutely everything. Right now, if you fly it very smoothly and gently, you can see there's not much of a difference, right? It's just an airplane. It just feels great. But as soon as I start doing hard rolls, you see it starts rolling all over the place, and it's got a bit of Dutch roll. And if I start, you know, yanking the stick back, it starts oscillating pitch up and down. And it's basically, what I'm trying to say is, without the dampeners, it's not a particularly stable airplane. In fact, I would say quite the opposite. It is highly unstable. So what we'll do is we'll get into a high alpha regime. Let's just demonstrate some of the interesting quirks of the flight controls here, because those of you that are aware of the F4 Phantom, you probably know and read that at high alpha you should be using rudder to turn, and that is because you can have a turn reversal with aileron, where, you know, the opposite wing stalls in the opposite direction to which you want to go in, and that'll cause the airplane, at least according to the flight manual, potentially to get into a spin, and potentially even a flat spin. So this airplane is capable of getting into a flat spin. However, I do have some questions with regards to the flight model, because I've tried a lot of things and I cannot get this airplane to get into a flat spin. So I don't know if it's just me. I mean, I've tried. Maybe it's the fuel load. I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that it's a clean jet. I don't know. I've tried with flaps, without flaps, with air brake, without air brake. But nonetheless, I will demonstrate to you just how it can get into that regime. So look how stable it is. Absolutely incredible. And I've got this real awesome stick pressure here now as we're just dropping below 150. Starts to shake. I've just trimmed it out nicely. I can trim it for this very low speed. I shouldn't be in this high alpha regime for too long, because there's a myriad of things that can go wrong with this airplane. But now, let's just say I want to turn. So I'm going to use rudder gently. And I'm just going to use the other rudder pedal just to keep it from... Okay, we've got a compressor stall. And this is a good this is going to be an easy way of demonstrating to you what a compressor stall does. So we'll just close the throttle and we'll try and go into a spin now. We'll try and get rid of these cautions, but because we've got a compressor stall, it's not liking it too much. So as you can see, I'm really trying to get into a flat, well, a spin of some sort, but I have to keep the controls in there. As soon as I let go, we're fine. Now, the reason this shaking is still there is because we have a compressor stall right now. So that's because the engine in there, the airflow hasn't unstalled in the compressor yet. So we need to get a speed of above 200 knots, which was what we're doing. But look at this feedback in my stick. I know exactly what the airplane's doing. Like, if I was looking out here and there was a bandit, I would know something's wrong, right? Obviously, I can see everything shaking in the cockpit. And you know what would be really cool? If I had like a shaker for my seat. If somebody has a good one or a suggestion for a good one, please, please comment down below, because I'd love to know. I'm just going to increase the speed up to maybe just over 300. This is exactly a situation where you don't want the slats extending as well. Because you want to keep your glide ratio. This thing has about a 10 to 1 glide ratio when it's clean, which is, it's not great. It's a lot better. It's a lot worse than an airliner. It's got pretty high wing loading. It's got small wing. Right, we're gonna try and, this is obviously not looking very good, is it? So we're just gonna try and pitch over a little bit more. Hopefully get out of this. This compressor stall at the moment is actually going to be a bit of an issue. I need to start planning and thinking about getting back to the airfield and potentially doing a landing, because usually at this point, yeah, there we go. Okay, compressor is unstalled. Good. So I was getting ready for a zoom climb to get back onto the runway there. So got to be careful with these compressor stalls. Actually, it was a really good demonstration, I think, in that one. Just it takes a while to install it sometimes. And it's quite cool, because you can actually damage this engine in many ways, multiple ways, not just the compressor stall. If you're high alpha, which is what, the reason for basically what happened with the compressor stall is because we're such high alpha. There's also other things. You don't want to keep the airplane below 300 knots for too long, between 250 and 300, because your alternators are cooled by the air flowing over the aircraft. So there's a lot to take into account. It's a very fun airplane, very analog. If it's totally not carefree, it's quite the opposite, but it's so rewarding and so fun. Unlike the Phantom, I think, which is also not carefree, but not very fun. My own personal opinion. This airplane actually feels like a pilot's airplane. You can see we've also toppled the standby ADI a little bit, which is funny. So The other thing you can do with this engine is you can actually damage it. You can actually, I did a bit of a tail slide high altitude by accident, and the engine went on fire. Something that can happen. You can also have a flame out, and then you know you have to glide down and trying to restart it as well. So there's a lot of fun engine management with this airplane. Again, it just adds to a lot of, I think, just a lot of fun. So what we'll do is we'll get our dampers back on. We'll get our flaps back as well, and we'll just do a reset of the system just to make sure we've got everything back. We've got no warnings. Excellent. So the airplane is once again fully serviceable and ready to go. So I think what we'll do is we'll come in for a low pass. I'll just demonstrate to you. You know, this airplane is just so nice to fly, and the thing with force feedback is I can feel how heavy and mechanical this airplane is. Like I said before, it'd be great to have kind of like a shaker for the seat. And maybe like a one you sit on, not one that actually connects and vibrates the seats itself, because I'm using like an old IKEA chair, which would be, you know, wouldn't work very well. But also I think rudder pedals. I don't really know of any company that currently does force feedback rudder pedals, because I think that would also be awesome. Because if you had really damped, well damped rudder pedals that didn't or that required a lot of force to move, the airplane would feel a lot more stable as well. You wouldn't be able to get into these oscillations, because these are, you know, these pedals even with a high spring setting are pretty easy to move. And also I want to keep them like this because I want to fly helicopters and kind of switch between the two without changing the springs out. Makes it a lot easier. So what we'll do is we'll just come in for a low pass. In fact, I might just put the HUD into landing mode because we get a flight path vector. It just makes it a little bit, sort of a little bit easier. So we just drop down very low here, and this is one of the things that you can be extremely low and you can just control that super easy. Now look how easy it is for me to control that, you know, minimal height off the ground, and it's absolutely phenomenal just how precise I think you can be with this airplane compared to a lot of other airplanes, you know, which can feel a little bit twitchy, a little bit all over the place, even with force feedback, to be fair. I just think this airplane in particular is just an absolute gem to fly in general, and I think even without force feedback, which I've never tried in this airplane, I think it would still be very fun. But yeah, this is just, it's just too much fun, and I absolutely love the AOA indicator. I think that's just so good with the, you know, the blue, the green, the red, you know, that square moving around, just giving you that such easy indication, because you don't necessarily pick up where that white bar is, but you definitely pick up where what the square is doing. So we'll just come in for another low pass. I just love doing low passes in the Mirage 2000. Like, just go over the landing lights there, or not the runway threshold lights rather. So we'll just go stupidly low, and I'm just demonstrating to you now. Just want to be careful here. Just how incredibly accurate, you know, you can be, and that's me talking to you guys as well, not really, you know, paying that much attention. So we'll come in for a landing now. We'll come in for a short approach. We're not going to do a standard overhead brake because a short approach is just way more fun, and also just kind of makes you learn a little bit more about the feel of the airplane on landing and judging your angles and everything, that kind of stuff. So what we'll do is we'll just come in, and this airplane requires a lot more thinking in terms of your positioning in space. Like other airplanes like the F-18, you just pull the stick back, do a load and roll, and after that you can figure it out, you know, if you're setting up for landing, for example, which is what I like doing, you know. I kind of like doing a sort of loaded roll. Like, for example, we come up here now, trip the stick back a little bit as well. So as we drop in below 300, we'll get the first stage of flaps, we'll get the air brakes out, and then we'll get just under 225, we'll get gear and flaps, and we'll try and glide it down here a little bit. Just need to make sure we don't exceed 225 knots when we're fully dirty. And it's got incredible feel just with, you know, the stick, just how loaded the stick is, and that stability is what I absolutely love about this airplane. Just gonna help it out with a little bit of rudder here. Just trying to, and now I'm just looking at the square, the green square, you know, the AOA indicator. I think it's so useful. It's absolutely brilliant design, I have to say. We'll overshot a little bit, but no big deal. Right, just gonna kill the throttle because we're gonna be too fast. And get rid of the air brakes. Just get our landing speed back. See if we can get a nice smooth touchdown on this one. There we go. We've got our landing out close to 11 degrees. Just flare a little bit. Ooh, over flared slightly. Just add a little bit of throttle. We've got loads of runway to play with, so I'm gonna try and get a smooth touchdown. There we go. You know, on a short runway, I wouldn't be deal. I just wanted to, just for pure fun sake, just do a really nice smooth touchdown. That was my idea. So just look over the nose, see where we're going, and honestly, this has definitely become one of my absolute favorite modules in DCS. And anybody who is like me, just loves analog stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, flying around and fly-by-wire stuff on F-18 and seeing all the flight control cycle do crazy things as you pull the stick back, that's also really fun. Don't get me wrong, absolutely. But if you just like something that is really hands-on, proper pilot's airplane, requires a lot of coordination, stick, rudder stuff, you know, you can't just pull as hard as you want, or, you know, like, this airplane requires a lot of care. But I feel like you are rewarded with so much if you are one of those people that just loves to, you know, really have a proper manual feedback and feel. And I haven't tried it with a non-force feedback stick, but I have to say, if you ever do get a chance of getting yourself a force feedback stick, then my goodness, this airplane's definitely one to have. The only big downside currently, there's no VR pilot body, no virtual pilot body. I think it's a bit of an immersion breaker. I don't really like that. Also, I'd like the F1M with the little MFD display on the left. I think the 1990s version. For me, that would be the airplane to have. Which, by the way, I think the Draken actually do fly in real life as the F1M, ex-Spanish F1Ms. So, with that said, folks, hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you do fly the F1, then comment down below. Tell me what you think about it. Maybe you disagree with everything I've said. Fair enough. But I hope you've enjoyed this video nonetheless. And hopefully I'll catch you in the next one. Adios.